Buckingham Palace released it just after dawn, before the streets had even filled, before the guards had finished their morning rounds. It did not ask for patience. It did not promise a future ceremony, a distant transition, a date circled years ahead on some royal calendar. It said the change had already happened. King Charles was no longer the one carrying the crown's active power. Prince William was. Not next year, not next month. Now. Inside Buckingham Palace, the silence that followed was louder than any announcement could have been. Aides stopped mid-stride. Phones buzzed and were ignored. Somewhere in the private wing, a door closed so softly it barely made a sound, and yet everyone who heard it understood exactly what it meant. This was not a scandal. Nobody had been caught in a lie. No political storm had forced a resignation. This was something rarer, something Britain had never quite prepared itself to witness. A king, stepping back from the throne while he was still standing, still breathing, still very much alive to watch someone else take his place. Before we go further into what happened behind those palace doors, tell us, where are you watching from tonight? Type your city or country in the comments below, and if a story like this pulls you in, one built on family, duty, and the quiet cost of power, you'll want to be here for what Royal Family series brings next, because this story is only just beginning to unfold. Charles had waited most of his life to wear that crown. Decades as heir, decades watching, learning, holding his ambitions just out of reach, because that was what duty required of him. When the moment finally came, he had plans, modernization, legacy, a reign built on service rather than spectacle. He had not planned on this. Inside his private study, aides said later, he read the transfer document twice. Not once, twice. As if the first reading might have been a mistake, as if the second might reveal a different set of words. It didn't. He set the pen down beside it and simply looked at his own signature, like it belonged to a stranger. Across the city, inside Kensington Palace, William received the news standing beside his wife, Catherine. He did not celebrate. He could barely breathe. He had spent his entire life preparing for this crown. But preparation, it turns out, is not the same as readiness. Catherine took his hand before he could say anything at all. She reminded him, quietly, that saying yes to this crown meant saying goodbye to the life they'd built, the ordinary mornings, the unguarded moments, the version of their family that belonged only to them. He nodded. He didn't trust his voice yet. Somewhere between the king's silence and the prince's unsteady breath, one document remained on a table inside Buckingham Palace. Sealed, signed, prepared in advance, which meant something far more unsettling than a sudden royal collapse. It meant Charles had known this was coming. He had prepared for it, agreed to it, long before the kingdom ever heard his name attached to a transfer of power. So the real question was never really why William became king. It was what Charles had discovered, quietly, privately, weeks before, that convinced him the crown could not wait a single day longer. And the answer begins somewhere far smaller than a palace statement. It begins in a quiet room at Windsor Castle, with a ceremony that was never supposed to be remembered at all. The investiture at Windsor Castle was supposed to be routine, a formality, a morning of ribbons, names, and quiet pride. It became something else entirely. 6 people stood in that room. No cameras, no guests. Just Charles, William, the Lord Chamberlain, a constitutional secretary, and 2 aides holding the honors list like it was any other Tuesday. It wasn't. Charles began reading the names steadily, the way he always did, calm, measured, and then he reached one name and stopped. He read it again, lost his place, pressed a finger to the page, as if he could hold the words still by force alone. Silence. Then a question. Nobody in that room was prepared to answer. Charles asked why someone who had passed years earlier had not yet arrived to approve the list. William felt the floor shift beneath him. He didn't panic. He didn't gasp. He simply asked the aides and the secretary to step outside, gently, quickly, before anyone else could witness what he had just witnessed. The door closed, and for a moment, It wasn't a king and his heir standing in that room anymore. It was just a father and a son who suddenly understood something he could never unknow. Charles, once the door was shut, admitted quietly that this was not the first time. There had been forgotten meetings, repeated questions, papers that no longer felt familiar in his hands. He feared, more than anything, making a mistake that could not be undone. A constitutional error, a decision with consequences reaching far beyond the walls of any palace. The Lord Chamberlain returned, once Charles had gone. He lifted the unsigned honours list, placed it inside a red folder, and marked it for review. That folder would not stay quiet for long, because what happens when the person meant to protect the crown becomes the reason it's suddenly at risk? That question followed William out of Windsor Castle, and it followed him straight into the one conversation he never wanted to have. Days later, Charles summoned his son to the private library at Buckingham Palace. He closed the door himself. No aides, no advisors, just the two of them, and the red folder sitting between them, like a decision neither wanted to make. Charles pushed it forward. His hand lingered on it a moment too long. Then he asked the question that had been circling both of them since Windsor. Did William believe his father was no longer capable of reigning? It wasn't anger in his voice. It was something heavier. Decades of waiting. Decades of sacrifice. All of it balanced on his son's next sentence. William refused to say the word incapable. He wouldn't. Couldn't. Not about the man who had shaped everything he understood about duty. But he also would not lie. He said the moment at Windsor didn't erase a lifetime of service. It didn't undo the reforms, the years, the reputation Charles had built with quiet persistence. Still, protecting his father from one private stumble could not come at the cost of the entire institution's stability. Every word William chose carefully, and every word still landed like a blow. Charles turned toward the window. His silence said more than his voice ever could. Then came the truth neither of them expected. Charles admitted he had commissioned the transfer document himself, before this conversation, before William had said a single word in that room. He had already made peace with what was coming. He had simply been waiting for the courage to sign it. There was more. His sudden withdrawal from public duties in recent weeks, the one everyone assumed was simple fatigue, had actually been something else entirely. A test. Palace officials had quietly observed how William handled briefings, decisions, and responsibilities without his father standing behind him. William sat with that revelation, like it physically weighed something. His father hadn't just feared losing the crown. He had been watching, carefully, silently, to see if his son was ready to hold it. Charles reached for the pen, and just as the tip touched the page, the library door opened. The Lord Chamberlain stepped inside, carrying a second file, one that would turn a private family decision into a moving, unstoppable machine. The Lord Chamberlain did not waste time on formality. He placed the file beside the unsigned transfer document and opened it without a word of comfort. Inside was the entire continuity plan, complete, ready, waiting only for a signature. Military communications would update within minutes. Official statements were already drafted. Every institution connected to the crown had been quietly prepared for exactly this moment. William would be presented to the kingdom as sovereign almost immediately. The formal coronation, the ceremony the public would eventually see, could come later. Power, it turns out, does not wait for ceremony. It waits for signatures. The Lord Chamberlain looked at Charles, and for the first time, his voice faltered. He said that serving the crown properly now meant recommending the end of the king's active reign. It was, by many accounts, the hardest sentence he had ever spoken aloud in that palace. Charles didn't interrupt. He let every painful word land. Moments later, Queen Camilla entered, summoned without explanation. She saw the open files. She understood, almost instantly, that everyone else in that room had known long before she did. Her question wasn't really about politics. It was about her own place, her own future, inside a palace that suddenly felt less certain than it had that morning. Charles gave one final condition before lifting the pen again. William must describe this transfer publicly as an act of service, never as removal, never as a son pushing a father aside. William agreed with a quiet nod. And when the pen finally touched the page, the kingdom gained a new king. But in that same instant, 4 people in that room began losing something they would never fully get back. The signature took only seconds. The silence afterward felt endless. Communications teams moved fast. William's royal cipher began replacing his father's on official documents. Audiences were reassigned. Titles shifted overnight. Charles remained a respected senior royal, a former sovereign whose service history would not be erased. But the daily authority, the decisions, the direct hand in governing, that had already moved elsewhere. It wasn't just symbolic, it was immediate, personal, absolute. Queen Camilla read the palace statement alone. She asked quietly whether her own title had changed too. Nobody in the room had an answer ready for her. Across the city, Catherine knelt beside their son, George, and gently explained that his father had to leave suddenly because the kingdom needed him. Simple words, enormous weight behind them. Charles declined the farewell address his staff had prepared. According to those close to him, he said he wasn't ready to speak to his people, while it still felt like defeat. Then William found something folded inside the signed file, a handwritten note from his father. An apology for handing him the crown before he felt ready, and a warning, never let the palace pull him away from his own children the way it once pulled Charles away from his. William didn't go to his ministers first. He went to find his father. He dismissed the aides outside his father's chamber and entered alone. No files between them this time, no officials softening the moment. Charles admitted, quietly, that watching his son become king felt like watching his own life continue without him in it. William didn't sit across from him. He knelt beside the chair instead, until there was no distance left between them at all. He told his father he would accept the crown, but he would never accept the idea that Charles had failed. Charles then revealed the true purpose behind the test. He hadn't simply wanted to know if his son was competent. He wanted to know if William would protect the crown, even if it meant damaging the bond between them. William had passed that test the hardest way possible, by choosing the kingdom's stability over his father's pride. He made his father one promise in return. The monarchy, under his reign, would stop demanding silence from the people carrying its weight. Something in Charles's shoulders finally eased. Later that day, William stood before the nation and spoke his first words as king. He didn't celebrate power. He honored the man who had just given it up. He called his father's decision an act of quiet courage. Britain did not witness a son's triumph that day. It witnessed something rarer, a father who knew his limit, and a son who accepted the crown without abandoning the man who wore it first. If this story moved you, that connection between duty and love, between power and family, stay close. Because next time on Royal Family Series, we go back further, to the quiet, guarded years before Charles ever became king, when a decision made by his own father nearly changed the entire line of succession. A secret kept for almost 30 years, one that William himself doesn't yet know. You won't want to miss what that silence was protecting.